My girlfriend and I have just moved into our new home, and honestly, it feels like the place we've always imagined living in. It suits us perfectly, and we even brought along Bella, our rescue cat we saved together. So in the beginning, everything felt like it had fallen into place. The only drawback we noticed early on was the house next door on our right. It looked deserted because someone had begun renovations, but never finished them. The way our homes are positioned is a little unusual. On the right side of our property, there's a passage leading to our back garden, and right beside it is the neighboring house's own entryway to their back garden. There isn't any fence between the two areas because the owner had taken the old one down, intending to put up a replacement, but abandoned the work halfway through. Because of that, both gardens were essentially open and connected. Behind that unfinished house, there's another home, separated by a proper fence. From what we could tell, it seemed like a group of young men lived there. Every so often, when we arrived home, we'd notice them walking straight through the abandoned neighbor's garden as a shortcut to reach the street. At the time, we didn't question it much. We assumed they might know the owner or be allowed to pass through. Then came our first night in the house. My girlfriend and I were sitting outside in the garden, enjoying being in our new space. Out of curiosity, we looked up toward the houses behind ours. That's when we saw someone in an upstairs window. A man just watching us. He wasn't trying to be subtle. He was openly staring, completely motionless. His face showed no emotion at all, and the room behind him was dark, which made it feel even creepier. We told ourselves he was probably just interested in seeing who had moved in. But after he continued staring for around 30 minutes without looking away, we finally decided we'd had enough and went back inside. The following few days passed normally. I went to work, and my fiancée stayed home continuing to unpack. A little while later, one evening, we went out into the garden again. It was already nighttime, but we loved being out there, looking at the stars and talking for hours, until we suddenly heard noise coming from the makeshift wooden board that had been put in place where the fence should have been. Then, out of nowhere, 3 men stepped into view and just stood there, staring at us. Trying to break the tension, I asked, "Are you okay?" Mainly because I could tell they weren't going to leave unless I addressed them. The youngest one, maybe about 29, was carrying a large bag, and we couldn't tell what was inside it. He offered us some washing up tablets that were clearly stolen. We said no. The whole interaction was painfully uncomfortable, so I tried to joke about it. He smiled slightly, said, "Okay," and then all 3 of them walked away. What unsettled me most was how casually they entered our garden without asking, like they believed they were entitled to be there. We tried to convince ourselves it was a one-time thing and went inside. But from that point on, the situation only escalated. They started coming into our garden repeatedly, more and more often, behaving in ways that felt deliberately threatening. We also noticed they were getting into the abandoned house next door by lifting up the fence that divided the gardens and walking through. I should mention here that my girlfriend and I are both only 20 years old. Naturally, we couldn't help thinking that these men might have been trying to intimidate us because we were 2 young women living alone. One day, while I was cleaning in the front room, I saw 2 police officers come around the side of our house. They went straight into the abandoned garden, lifted the fence, and looked around for a short while. Then they left without speaking to us at all. It seemed odd, but I went back to what I was doing, thinking maybe something suspicious was going on next door. A few days after that, the police came knocking. They told us the property behind our house was now empty. The men living there had been removed because of antisocial behavior, not only toward us, but toward other people in the neighborhood as well. That news was a huge relief. Even though things hadn't turned physical yet, we felt like this meant it couldn't get worse. We carried on trying to settle into our new home. But one day, while I was taking a bath, I suddenly heard a loud crash outside. I quickly got out, threw on clothes, and ran to find my girlfriend. She was in the spare bedroom, filming something through the window that overlooks the now vacant house's garden. When I asked what was happening, she whispered for me to stay quiet. After a moment, she explained what she had just seen. A man we didn't recognize had pointed directly up at our bedroom window, and once he realized she was watching, he immediately ran toward our house at full speed. As he passed by, he grabbed and tested our door handle, then turned and sprinted back into the empty property's garden. He lifted the broken fence up and then began smashing and pounding on every window of the vacant house. We called the police right away. They arrived, watched the footage, took our statement, and left. We were shaken to the core. Why did he try our door handle and then rush to break into the abandoned property? What was his intention? A few nights later, while we were asleep, we heard loud whistling outside. It was the kind of whistle men use to harass women. We checked the time. It was 2:16 a.m. We stayed silent and listened, then heard someone tapping on one of our windows. Completely terrified, we checked the cameras, but for some reason, none of them caught anything. Whoever it was must have left quickly, because the noises stopped soon after. We were too scared to rest at all, so the next day we went to my mom's house and stayed there overnight. When we returned the next morning, we saw that our Ring doorbell had been taken off the wall and placed on the ground. The SD card was missing. Someone had been back while we were gone, and we were convinced we knew exactly who did it. Who else would do something like that? We contacted the police again, and they told us to keep everything locked. Doors, windows, everything. The officer on the phone even warned that removing the camera could mean they were planning something more serious, which scared us even more. But at least she didn't sugarcoat it. For weeks afterward, the harassment continued. Whistling, banging, and repeated attempts to access the property. We filed report after report. They didn't test our door handle again, so we hoped the worst was behind us. But about 3 weeks later, we were in bed watching funny camera clips together when we switched to the live feed. And what we saw made our blood run cold. Outside, in front of our garden, stood a man wearing a black mask over the lower half of his face and a hood pulled up. He held his arms out wide, as though he was copying the pose of Jesus on the cross. Then he stared directly up at our bedroom window with his head tilted. We couldn't move. At the time, we had already brought the camera inside, so none of it was recorded. We were so terrified that we didn't even think to screen record it. He said something, but we couldn't make out his words. Then he turned away, crossed to the other side of the road, and stood there facing our house for nearly half an hour without leaving. We called the police again. This time, they told us that simply staring at someone's house wasn't a crime, and they brushed it off. Even when we explained what he had done on our property, they acted like we were being dramatic. After that, we couldn't sleep properly for days. Every sound outside made us panic, even normal sounds. Then, one night at 2:52 a.m., we received a notification. I woke my girlfriend and told her, "Someone is outside, I'm sure of it. Please look at the camera." She checked, and there they were. Two masked men were coming from the side of our house, shining flashlights into our windows. One of them, the same man who had been tormenting us, was holding something that looked like a crowbar. We couldn't understand why we were being targeted. What were they trying to achieve? Over and over again, he would stand across the road for hours, pointing at our house, waving or yelling things up toward our bedroom window. And every time we looked, he would lock eyes with us and stare with that same empty expression. It was clearly meant to frighten us, and it worked. We kept reporting it to the police, but they've barely done anything. The intimidation has never fully stopped. We've now installed cameras and record everything, but we still feel completely powerless. And even today, he showed up again, standing outside, staring up at us. We managed to capture it on video, and we're genuinely terrified. We'll update if anything else happens. Let me start by saying this clearly. I'm not insane. I understand exactly how this is going to sound. Paranoid, unstable, irrational. But I promise you, everything I'm about to describe genuinely happened. And it all began with a face, or more precisely, multiple faces that all seemed slightly wrong somehow. 3 months ago, I broke things off with my ex, Caleb. We'd been together for nearly 2 years, and the truth is, the relationship should have ended long before it did. Caleb was never physically violent. He never hit me, but he was controlling and possessive in this quiet, methodical, almost strategic way. Arguably the scariest kind. He'd monitor how long I spent on my phone and then interrogate me about my day, repeating questions in different ways to see if my answers matched each time. After I finally left him, I did everything I could to cut contact. I changed my phone number, deactivated all my social media, and even moved to a new apartment. I truly believed I'd escaped him. Then the barista happened. It was a Tuesday morning when I stopped into a small, tucked-away coffee shop near my new place. A little spot I'd only visited once or twice before. When I walked up to the counter, the barista, a girl around my age, smiled at me. But something about the way her face looked made me hesitate. She tilted her head slightly and said, "Good morning, sunshine." I went completely still because that was Caleb's nickname for me. And it wasn't some common pet name. He used to use it sarcastically whenever I was upset, like, "What's wrong, sunshine?" He liked provoking people and pressing on sensitive spots. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was probably just a coincidence. But it didn't stop there. A few days later, I took a rideshare to work. The driver wasn't someone I'd had before. An older man, probably in his 50s. The whole drive, he kept checking the rearview mirror like he was studying my face, like he was trying to place me. Then, out of nowhere, he asked if I'd ever figured out what I was running from. He said it in this casual tone, like it was normal conversation. I stared and responded, "What?" And he only laughed and shook his head, like I was supposed to understand some inside joke. Caleb had said that exact thing to me once. After I told him I needed time to work things out and figure out who I was, he leaned in, completely serious, and asked, "Ever figure out what you're running from?" Now 2 strangers had repeated his words exactly, and then it became constant. At the grocery store, a woman brushed against me and murmured, "You don't get to just disappear." A man passing me on the street said, "Still wearing your hair like that," without even slowing down. Another time, someone who worked in my building told me, "You always liked this song," while humming the exact melody Caleb used to play during our arguments. What disturbed me wasn't their faces themselves. It was the way they looked at me, like they knew me, or like they believed they did. Their appearances were all different, but their eyes had the same kind of expression. I started wondering if I was losing my mind. I mean, what else could explain it? And that's when I did something I'm not proud of. I reached out to Caleb, but not directly. I messaged his sister and told her to tell him to stop. I assumed he'd hired a private investigator or found some way to keep tabs on me. Or maybe he was pulling strings through other people. I just wanted it to end. She replied the next day and said, "I have no idea what you're talking about. Caleb's in rehab. He's been there 6 weeks and doesn't have a phone." I didn't believe her. I assumed she was lying to protect him until a week later when she posted a photo of him on Facebook. He looked pale, hollowed out, and unhealthy, holding one of those sobriety chips for one day clean. At that point, it couldn't have been Caleb. At least not in a direct way. Still, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that these strangers knew things they had no right to know. One night, I stayed at work late. I didn't want to go home anymore because my apartment no longer felt safe. Nothing bad had happened inside it, but the idea of being alone there made me uneasy. Finally, around 10 p.m., I forced myself to leave. I walked the 10 minutes back to my place with my head down. I had headphones on, but no music playing, something I'd trained myself to do so I could still hear footsteps if someone followed me. When I turned onto my block, I noticed someone sitting on the stoop of the building across the street from mine. A young guy in a hood pulled up, his face tilted down. I almost kept walking until he spoke. "Cold out tonight, huh, sunshine?" I stopped instantly. He never even looked at me. He just stared at the pavement like he was reading something written there. I slowly kept walking, said nothing, and went inside my building. Once inside my apartment, I locked every single bolt. Then I sat on the couch for hours in complete silence, just listening. Eventually, I must have drifted off. The next morning, I woke up and found my doormat flipped upside down. It might not sound like much, but I live alone, and my unit is on the top floor. No one accidentally wanders past my door. When I lifted the mat, I saw that someone had written something on the underside in pen. "You can change your face too if you want, but I'll still recognize you." I didn't know what it meant, but it made me physically sick. I threw up. That same day, I booked a hotel room for the weekend. I didn't pack anything. I left my apartment without even grabbing clothes because I didn't feel safe spending even a few extra minutes there. I only wanted to be somewhere with people around. The hotel clerk gave me a room on the 4th floor. It wasn't great, small, quiet, a little stuffy, but it felt secure. That sense of safety lasted until about 2 a.m. Someone knocked on my door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I sat up, frozen, and waited. After a while, they knocked again. I quietly crept to the peephole. Standing outside was a woman, maybe in her 40s, her face completely blank. No expression, no emotion. She was just staring at the door, not speaking. I stayed silent and didn't move. Eventually, she walked away. it was one of the most unsettling things I had ever witnessed. The next morning, I asked the front desk if someone had come by my room during the night. They told me no one should have even been on that floor at that hour, especially because every room on that floor was vacant. That's when everything started to make sense. These weren't random people. Someone was sending them, giving them details, feeding them specific lines. They were repeating Caleb's phrases on purpose. But if Caleb wasn't the one directly doing it, then who was? And why? I thought about him being in rehab. I thought about how obsessed he was with control and how he never wanted me fully out of his reach. He didn't have to be the one physically showing up. He could simply arrange for other people to do it. So I started looking deeper, and I remembered a conversation from months before we broke up. Caleb once talked about being part of an online forum, a place where people exchanged tactics. At the time, he described it like it was something about productivity or self-improvement. I don't remember what it was called, and I don't think he ever told me the exact name. But looking back, it sounded like some disturbing cult-like role-play nonsense. Except now it was happening to me in real life. I became convinced that someone, most likely Caleb, had paid people to repeat his words and copy his patterns so that even after he was gone, I'd still be haunted by his presence. It wasn't stalking in the typical sense. It felt more like psychological graffiti, like he was painting himself onto strangers, so I could never know whether the person I was seeing was real or connected or intentional. I don't even think it was about him watching me. It felt like it was about making sure I could never stop watching for him. I moved again. I vanished from social media again. I even changed my hair color. I told my friends not to share my location with anyone. And for a while, it worked. Until last week. I was walking home from the bookstore when a woman passed me and said, "Still hiding behind books, sunshine." She didn't pause. She didn't even glance at me. She just kept walking like it was nothing. I don't believe this is ever going to end. Maybe he paid for some underground service that keeps doing this for months. Maybe it's set up for a year, who knows? Maybe he made it public. Maybe it turned into some sick underground challenge. Who can scare sunshine the best? Who can get closest without ever touching? I can't trust anyone's face anymore. The nonstop paranoia is destroying my mental health. My family has always been made up of people who prefer staying home rather than traveling. So everyone was shocked when my aunt suddenly suggested we take a trip to one of Michigan's Great Lakes. Still, we all agreed, mostly because we wanted to do something different and make new memories together. My cousin managed to reserve a huge Airbnb that somehow fit all 18 of us, which felt unbelievable, especially considering how affordable it was. The property sat directly along the shoreline, and the lake view was absolutely stunning. The water stretched so far that it looked almost like an ocean. Most of the family claimed bedrooms inside the main house, but since our group was so big, some of us had to sleep in a second structure behind it. It was basically a 2-story garage with bedrooms located upstairs. 3 of my cousins and I were assigned to stay there. At first, we didn't worry about it. We spent the majority of the first day enjoying ourselves, soaking in the hot tub, lounging on the sand, and taking in the scenery. It wasn't until later that night, when we truly entered the garage, that we realized something was wrong. The entire place felt old and poorly maintained. The bathrooms were carpeted and smelled damp and moldy. The bed sheets were visibly stained, and the door had a latch that didn't feel secure at all. It was obvious the cleaning crew had focused on the main house and barely touched the garage. My cousins were disgusted. and said they wouldn't sleep on the beds unless the sheets were washed first. I suggested we just do laundry. The washer and dryer were tiny, which meant we could only wash one set of sheets at a time, and it became clear we'd be awake for a long while. While waiting for the first cycle, we stayed upstairs and tried to pass the time. My cousin Maria started complaining about how we got stuck with the worst sleeping area. While she was talking, I felt something shift inside me. An uneasy feeling, like something bad was about to happen. I've experienced that kind of instinct before. It's rare, but when it hits, it usually leads to a nightmare situation or something even worse. I told my cousins we needed to stay aware, and they took it seriously, especially since all of us had already lived through a break-in back when we were in Detroit. Close to midnight, we heard the chime downstairs letting us know the washing cycle was finished. I went down by myself, moved the laundry into the dryer, and brought the fresh, clean-smelling sheets upstairs. When my cousins saw how much better they looked and felt, they immediately wanted their own bedding washed too. So I kept going, walking up and down the stairs, switching out laundry load after load so everyone could have clean sheets. By about 2:37 a.m., the laundry was finally done. We made the beds, and we were completely exhausted. My cousin Nikki said she wanted the light left on, and while everyone else drifted off pretty fast, I stayed awake working on school assignments on my phone. I've been a light sleeper ever since that break-in, so even when I'm tired, I'm still extremely aware of what's happening around me. That night was no different. Then around 3 a.m., a massive slam hit the garage door, like someone had thrown their entire body into it. I jolted upright, but none of my cousins stirred. I tried convincing myself it was just the wind, even though it sounded far too heavy to be that. I stayed quiet and forced myself to lie back down, but it happened again. The second impact was just as loud, maybe worse, and this time it actually shook the garage door. The entire structure vibrated. I was fully awake now, staring around the dim, lamp-lit room while my cousins continued sleeping. There was no way an animal or a gust of wind could hit the door like that. About 20 minutes later, it happened a third time. Another explosive crash slammed into the garage door and the whole place trembled again. This time, 2 of my cousins shot up immediately. I asked them if they heard it, though I already knew they had. Nikki asked what it was, and I told her I wasn't sure, but it was the third time I'd heard it. All of us agreed. There was no chance wind could cause that kind of noise. Nikki suggested we text her mom, my aunt, so we did. It was 4:11 a.m. when she responded, and it was obvious she knew something serious was happening. She woke up my uncle, and he went outside to check the property. We stayed upstairs, too scared to move, until we heard someone knocking. It was my uncle at the door. When we opened it, he wasn't alone. My dad and several of our older male cousins were with him. That was when I realized the situation was real. It wasn't wind, and it wasn't someone messing around. My uncle told us to grab our stuff because we were going to sleep inside the main house. Then he said the words that made my stomach drop. There was someone on the property. I threw everything into my suitcase as fast as I could. We all rushed out of the garage and ran into the main house. By then, most of the family had woken up because of the noise and confusion. Everyone gathered in the living room, trying to understand what had happened. I explained that I had heard the first 2 crashes, and my cousins backed me up about the third one. My aunt told us what happened when my uncle went outside. She had followed him. He called out, yelling, "Hey!" at someone who was standing behind the garage. Right after that, the main house door slammed behind her. But there was no wind strong enough to explain it. She panicked, thinking someone might have slipped into the house, so she ran to wake up my dad and the other cousins. They searched, but no one was found inside. Then my uncle explained what he saw. A man had been standing behind the garage, completely visible, not trying to hide, not moving, just staring like he wanted to be noticed. When my uncle called out, the man didn't react at all. He simply turned and walked away, and then disappeared. Not like he ran into the shadows or took off down the beach. He vanished as if he wasn't even real. There were no crunching leaves, no footsteps, nothing. And the scariest part was that my uncle isn't someone who exaggerates or invents stories. He's serious, rational, and grounded, which made the whole thing even more terrifying. My brothers also said they discovered 2 jester cards, one inside the main house and one inside the garage. The one found in the garage looked warped and almost demonic. One of my cousins pointed out that jesters are symbols of mockery, and that the banging had started right around 3 a.m., the so-called devil's hour. It felt like we were being taunted. My uncle even searched for footprints, but the only tracks he saw belonged to himself and our cousins, none that could have come from the man. Another cousin even drove around the road during the incident to see if someone was running away, but he didn't spot a single person. After that, nobody went back into the garage. We all squeezed into the main house, sleeping anywhere we could, on couches, floors, and whatever space was available. My mom even gave up her own bed so we could rest more comfortably. On the second night, my mom slept on a couch near the large windows. Around 4 a.m., she woke up hearing footsteps on the porch. She didn't even open her eyes. She was too afraid she might see someone staring through the glass. Then she heard someone trying the basement door. The lock on it was weak, and that was where my brothers and our male cousins were sleeping. The door rattled hard, like someone was testing it or attempting to force it open. My mom ran toward the basement, but by the time she reached the beachside entrance, no one was there. All the boys downstairs were still asleep. That was it for us. Even though we were supposed to stay until Tuesday, we packed up and left on Monday. On the drive home, we couldn't stop talking about what had happened. When my mom learned that I'd been going downstairs alone for laundry throughout the night, she suggested someone could have been watching and assumed I was the only one staying in the garage. The timing between my last trip downstairs and when we finally went to bed lined up far too well with the first bang. Different theories started spreading among us. Some family members thought it could have been someone nearby trying to frighten us into leaving. Others became convinced something paranormal was involved, especially because of the jester cards. My aunt pointed out that an ordinary person would have run the moment my uncle confronted them. But that man didn't run. He watched and then disappeared. We reached out to the Airbnb host. She told us she would check the security footage from the camera above the garage door, but we never heard from her again. That made us question everything. Did she know the man? Was he a neighbor? When we first arrived, my sister and cousin had taken a walk along the beach and passed a woman living next door. The woman didn't greet them or smile. She only stared at them with a cold, unfriendly expression. Since the area was so remote, we understood that locals might be irritated by constant Airbnb guests coming through. But we had been respectful. We didn't deserve what happened. This was our very first family vacation, and hopefully it won't be the last, despite everything we experienced.